Look, on Leadership Now, I promised never to do commercials, but here we are. Why? Well, I have a new book in the works. It's coming out spring 2026, and I wanted to give you an advance heads up about it. The title, The Future of Work is Gray, and it's kind of a big deal to me because the book dives into the age crisis that's reshaping work as we know it. It's something that I call age debt, but spoiler alert, it does turn into some solution. There's some hope, there's some positive, and that's called the experience dividend. So if your workplace still thinks that age is a liability, well, it's time to retire that mindset. In fact, we might want to retire the word retire. So yeah, I don't do ads. This is a special occasion, and for it, I am willing to go gray. And maybe Grey Goose will sponsor me, not sure. Anyway, spring 2026, the future of work is gray. Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Leadership Now with me, Dan Pontefract. Am I so excited today to have Gary A. Officer in the house. Gary, a bio, and then we're going to get right into it. So, Gary Officer, you're a seasoned social entrepreneur and chief executive known for innovative, value-driven public-private partnerships that remove barriers to community development. Gary is currently the president and CEO of Center for Workforce Inclusion, formerly known as Senior Service America, Inc. It's the largest and most experienced nonprofit dedicated exclusively to workplace inclusion and economic opportunity for low-income, older job seekers. Gary previously served in senior executive positions at the Newseum and the Woodrow Wilson Center for International Scholars in Washington, D.C. From 2006 through 13, he served as the president and CEO at Rebuilding Together, Inc., the nation's largest volunteer-based home ownership preservation nonprofit and fourth largest remodeler. Under his leadership, Rebuilding Together grew operating income sevenfold and created award-winning partnerships with blue-chip corporate brands in support of the organization's mission. Gary served as president of the National Credit Union Foundation, that's NCUF, the national foundation supporting credit union development in the United States, and as an affiliate of the Credit Union National Association, NCUF promoted and manages credit union development and consumer saving programs on behalf of CONA and the U.S. credit union movement. The foundation also manages the National Development Education Volunteer Program. These days, we're going to focus specifically, Gary, on your work at the Workforce Inclusion Center for Workforce Inclusion. I glommed onto you because of a Forbes column that you penned that to me was and is one of those missives that far too many CEOs and senior leaders have not read, ultimately because our workforces are both aging, as is society, yet there isn't really a vision for workforce inclusion for those that are older workers. And so I wanted to start, first of all, with the big bang. How do you see the workforce these days in terms of its inclusion for older workers? What are we getting right, and maybe perhaps what are we not getting right?
I think what we're getting, I think that the document that illustrates to me where older Americans lie within our nation's workforce system is the monthly jobs report, which I study forensically. The monthly jobs report is issued by the Bureau of Labor Statistics through the Department of Labor.
Yep.
So I go through that, and here's some statistics that I think speaks to your question. In December, we had in this country 8.1 million available jobs. And we had 6.9 million Americans looking for work. There's a disconnect.
Very much so.
Yet, for Americans who are 55 and over, their labor force participation rate was 38.3%.
Mm-hmm.
The long-term unemployment rate for older Americans 55 and over was 21.8%. So even while we have jobs available, right?
Yeah.
Much of which cannot be filled by our existing workforce. If you are older in this country, you have the most painful experience trying to find an employer who is going to hire you. And when many older Americans who we survey said that, 90% of whom have said that they have experienced age-related bias in the interview process, then that's a problem. So age bias, age discrimination, long-term unemployment numbers, 4 times the national average, almost historic lows on the labor force participation rate, doesn't tell a very good story about what it's like to age in the United States, but more pertinently, what it's like to age in our workforce.
So not only is there a gap between jobs available or open and those seeking work, and particularly as you pointed out rightly from BLS data from those 55 and up that are
Yes,
certainly underemployed, if not unemployed.
yes,
There's also the sort of the demographic reality from a individual prosperity perspective in that A, human beings are living longer. B,
yes,
as a result of living longer, we might need to make and earn money longer. And
yes,
C, if you do look at BLS data and other data points within America, and frankly speaking, the G7,
yes,
the median savings of individuals 55 and up is paltry comparative to the fact that they may live into their 80s, if not 90s, if not blue zone hundreds. So
yes,
I'm missing the point where individuals whom are living longer want purpose and meaning by virtue of actually being employed and doing something good with that crystallized intelligence that they have, but also they need to if they're not having had saved enough. Why is there this huge disconnect between the workforce who need people and the individuals who actually want to work? I'm just missing the plot here, Gary.
Yeah, that's a loaded question, and it's layered in complexity. So let me take the piece about the U.S. I think I read a report which I wrote about actually earlier this year about our nation's retirement security needs. And in that report that was conducted by the CFA Institute,
Mhm.
the US was graded C minus when it came to retirement security for Americans as they age. That feeds into happiness, something we very rarely talk about in this country, right?
Yeah.
The World Happiness Index, where it found the US was in the bottom grouping of nations in the largest among the largest economies. So retirement insecurity creates a level of emotional trauma that forces us to make hard choices about whether or not to remain in the workforce, find something else just to get by. And that gets us into another area where we don't talk much about, which is the emergence of the gig economy.
Yeah.
So I ask the question all the time, Dan, where are people? If they're not part of the workforce, what are they doing?
Right.
And the Society for Human Resources Management have conducted a report that said that by 2030, 50% of the American workforce will be self-employed CEOs.
Wow.
They're Lyft drivers, they're doing Uber Eats, Uber, they're doing Airbnb, they're doing all manner of side hustles just to get by. And that's where the workforce is trending. We don't often speak about it, but we have a huge gig economy that's absorbing people that have exited the workforce. So why is the US different?
Hmm.
Why is the US different? The critical factor driving people's interest in continuing to work is the absence of a social safety net, right? Healthcare cost on the individual and healthcare as a cause for bankruptcy is a unique US phenomenon. So I have friends in the UK and Europe who are my age and your age who have retired. And they've retired because they have a national healthcare system that provides for them in the event they become ill. We
Mhm.
don't have that here, and that forces us to remain in the workforce as long as we can because of that reality. Just a layered question, and it's many, many parts.
Okay. Well, if we want older workers with that aforementioned crystallized intelligence, i.e., the experience, whom,
Yes,
whether they're engineers or in marketing or product or sales, whatever the case may be, we have some very wise individuals who have transferable skills that could be employed in full-time manners in
yes,
organizations that need these types of intelligentsia, I'll say. So, Gary, what are some of these systemic barriers that you see from SHRM or talent and recruitment teams or just leaders themselves? What's getting in the way of saying, look, we know you may be 55 or older, but we know also that you got to this point through the fact that you probably have a good amount of experience and you're adaptable. Like you're fluid. You're able to massage situations with that credibility that you've earned by going through various experiences.
yes.
I'm missing the plot, Gary, on why organizations don't see that these individuals, like the you and the I, so to say, are able to transfer that knowledge and to learn new skills in new roles in new organizations.
That's a great question. I think that the short answer is, and I experienced that in my career at one of my stops many years ago, when I began to see recent hires come into the organization who were essentially 5 years the junior of the person who hired them.
Mm.
And I refer to that as the water cooler hire. We hire people, sorry, we hire people that we want to hang out with at a happy hour. It was told to me by someone, a true story. When someone sits across the table from you and sees someone who is in their mid 50s and you are in your early 30s, you are looking at your aunt or your uncle.
Right.
Do you want to hire your aunt or your uncle? And before the Olympics, I saw this interview of a Canadian athlete who was the oldest athlete on the Canadian Olympic team heading to Paris. The interviewer asked her, "What do you bring to the team?" She said, "I met the qualifying standard, but this is what I bring. I bring resilience. I bring experience. I bring a certain gravitas in knowing how to function in and around teams. But more importantly, I bring gratitude.
Yeah.
I bring gratitude." So a lot of it is personal. A lot of it is rooted in culture. A lot of it is influenced by our individual preferences. It's real. Regardless of need, we will default to people we are most comfortable with.
So it sounds like, I mean, part of your role, part of your purpose, it seems, is to help shift that narrative. And that narrative seems quite entrenched. So what is it that senior leaders and organizations in general need to be thinking about intergenerational collaboration, about
It's
age diverse teams? Like, what are these narratives we need to start rebuilding, I suppose?
it's really about what are the goals, right? If is the goal to win that gold medal? Is the goal to enjoy historic year-over-year growth?
Hmm.
Is it to ensure that we are innovating in real time by absorbing the ideas and experiences of a range of different voices? Another story, which I followed very closely. I'm a storyteller.
Yes.
The US Olympic basketball team.
Yeah.
Actually wrote a piece about it recently. That team had veterans who were pushing 40 years old. That team also had a young man from Boston who was the MVP for the season, having just won the NBA championship. But the people on the floor when it mattered the most were LeBron James, Steph Curry, and
Kevin Durant.
Kevin Durant. They took the team over the line. And on the floor, you had folks, the younger athletes were on the floor too. But the team recognized we needed to rely on a diversity of talent, but also rely on those who have been there before. And the team won. So what is the goal? What is the goal? Once you
Hmm.
have that in your mind, you assemble talent, irrespective of race, gender, or age, to ensure that the team wins.
Well, the fact is, and you know as well, whether it's BLS or McKinsey or Deloitte or Bain, who suggested that it's fewer than 4% of firms that ultimately commit to integrating older workers
Yes.
into the organization. Again, there's a huge chasm to overcome. So if we can look to dream teams and 2024 Olympic teams like the U.S. men's basketball team, and I get the point. What do we need to do in the organization to reflect the fact that intergenerational makeup is far better when you combine the fluid and crystallized experience and intelligence for the goal of whether it's EBITDA, innovation, CSAT, whatever ESAT, it doesn't really matter what it is. I get your point of the goal, but it just seems like the chasm is quite vast to cross right now, even though the stats and the data is staring us in the face.
Yeah, the stats and the data are compelling, quite frankly, and
Mhm.
somewhat disappointing. So I
Yeah.
think a couple of things a company has to recognize, which I think speaks to your question. The misconception that older workers lack the technological savvy to
Mm.
function in a 21st century workforce. Every research I've seen have suggested that older workers function at the skill level for their jobs as they age, provided that they remain in the workforce. When they leave the workforce
Ah.
and technology moves ahead of them, they fall behind. So we have to recognize that keeping someone on the team, regardless of age, but based on skill, has tremendous merit. That's one. Two, the misconception that older workers, if they remain on the payroll, become more expensive to an organization or company. That's also proven to be false.
Mhm.
A younger employee married with three children will cost more than a 55-year-old with his or her partner. So the misconceptions about cost is also very real. And then there's the cost of losing talent. When you lose someone from a team, you have to replace that person. You have to onboard that person. If it's a younger person, that person may be there for no more than 18 months to 2 years.
Mhm.
And the process starts all over again. So there's a hidden cost to encouraging people to exit the workforce if they're older and you're moving towards a younger workforce. Some misconceptions are real. Let's overcome that. Looking at the team and the skills and who has the skills to perform on the job, that's important. But when you have 8.2 million available jobs, Dan, and only 6.9 million job seekers, it tells you there's a need.
Mhm.
And that need should not manifest itself in a long-term unemployment rate of 21.8% for older Americans.
It just seems so absurd. I mean, with the data again staring us in the face, you'd think
Yes,
that we'd do something about it as senior leaders within our organizations.
yes. And moreover, I think it's also important to recognize that older workers, when fully employed, bring such enormous gravitas and experience and poise, the problem solving, working within a team, adding a certain perspective, often overlooked by folks who haven't lived a long life in the workforce.
Well, that
It's
that actually
recognizing,
it segues to something I wanted to get with you, and thank you. I
sure.
didn't mean to interrupt, but it's about that notion of the mentorship, the transformational transition, if you will, or transfer of that wisdom, that knowledge, that experience to younger workers. I think sometimes our organizations and leaders miss the plot on that hidden opportunity cost that when they have been, I guess, disbanded or taken out of the organization, we miss out on all of that
Mm.
transfer that can occur.
It's skill transfer, it's transferring of wisdom and knowing what's appropriate and how do we engage with one another. I once worked in an organization, we had an older lady on this team, her name is Miss Yvonne. All the younger employees would go to Miss Yvonne when they had a problem. And she would close the door and she would speak to them about what they were struggling with, either on the job or outside of work that was impacting their performance.
That's glorious. I love it.
And they still refer to her as Miss Yvonne 10
Uh,
years after she had was retired. So when you have those kinds of elders who are performing at the skill level for their jobs, but can be a mentor in many ways for young people entering the workforce, that's a secret sauce that many of us fail to acknowledge or recognize. And leaders have to recognize it too by making age inclusiveness a priority for their workforce. It also starts at the top.
mhm. Well, we dance around the word, but I mean it you can call it a blind spot, but what it really is ageism. And I'm curious from your vantage point and the good work that you're doing, what are those steps or I guess tactics that we need to really be thinking about in the organization to overcome that level of ageism for the people to look at the Miss Yvonnes as the wise and the wonder of, hey, can I learn from the Miss Yvonnes to help me in my career development, etc.
I think that's a great question. I always say this for any organization to adapt any kind of culture change, it starts with the CEO.
Hmm.
It starts with the C-suite. It's what they emphasize by way of expectations. It's how they construct a narrative around how they would like the organization's culture to be formed. And it's influenced and implemented by human resources. So this is an empowerment drive through human resources, right? To make sure that the values of the organization, as defined and articulated by the CEO, is actually one that is being implemented. You cannot leave these kinds of decisions to the line managers, right? You cannot leave it to folks who may have their own bias and preferences. It starts at the top.
Hmm.
And leaders have to ask the question. When I have ran several organizations and I'm seeing patterns of hiring, I'm calling HR on the quiet. What's happening here?
Right.
Why are all the folks coming in of the same profile? What happened to a broader pool? Do we not have any older job seekers? What's going on here? So leaders have to be more involved, right, and intentional about looking at the organization in its entirety and recognizing trends or potential blind spots that he or she and the leadership team have to address.
Which I suppose it dovetails into a question for you, Gary, about culture. So if
Yes,
the C-suite and the CEO in particular, if he or she are, quote, in charge of the company prowess, the company success, the organizational
yes.
success, that often comes down to, well, what is the culture in which that we inculcate the way in which to do our business? And if older workers are not part of the culture, they're not even thought of as some sort of intergenerational opportunity, then it's not going to happen. So, what do you say then of the culture change that's required for this to actually take shape?
Oh, that's a tough question, Dan. I think the I would offer that culture change has to inform performance outcomes.
Hmm.
It has to inform the the realization and the pursuit of corporate goals that are established to inform our success. And it's captured in a team comprised of individuals with talent and skills, regardless of age, gender, race, who can contribute towards those ideals. And if research has informed us that intergenerational teams are more adept, are better performers, then intentionally we should ensure that we do whatever we can to have intergenerational teams working across the organization in the pursuit of our goals.
Hmm.
You've got to elevate the conversation, point it to outcomes that are important to the organization, its missions, its stakeholders, its board, its communities, and construct a workforce that can achieve that.
So I'm with you. You had me sort of at hello, Gary. Do you think, however, that there are impediments? And what I mean by that, and I'll expand on my point, is sort of relics and antiquated processes, if not models and thinking from yesteryear. And whether that is how we do succession planning, how we do talent planning,
It's,
how we do hiring, how we do firing, how we do learning and development, like all of these kind of quote unquote people and culture models and systems is are we using um are we trying are we trying to play an album when we're streaming music these days, if you're following the metaphor?
I think possibly, but again, it's complicated. So I will default to this. Before the pandemic, when we were all in the office, roughly 4% of the US workforce worked remotely. By roughly two-thirds through the pandemic, ZipRecruiter did a survey
Hmm.
that found that 56% of job seekers were looking only for work that provided the opportunity to work remotely. And about 60% of the workforce did just that.
Hmm.
Many folks coming into the workforce when we're younger, they were used to certain way of doing things and did not have the type of engagement with their peers in an office setting around which relationships are built. During the pandemic also, millions of older Americans were not part of the Great Resignation. They were part of the great sifting out,
Yes.
right? Many were not called back into service when the period ended, when they were then told come back to work. Many
Yeah.
waited for the phone call that never came,
Yeah.
right? So now you have millions really of older people that were outside the workforce, scrambling to get in, defaulted to other employment methods, income methods, and the tone of the place, office environment shifted. My organization shifted. We had retirement en masse in the back end of the pandemic, and now we've got younger workers coming in Dan, without the experience, making the decisions that with no default to judgment or muscle memory, right? So in many ways, to answer your question, if I'm doing it correctly, the construct of the workforce has shifted, right? The thinking has shifted.
Mhm.
And now we're trying to do something with a different kind of a workforce, perhaps using models, to your point, that would have been applicable 5 years ago, but may not be today. Because if COVID did one thing, it accelerated us into the future. I had no idea what Zoom was until March 2020. I'd never used Teams,
Right.
right? So we have to adjust to your point about how do we find a way to engage with one another, to understand each other, to construct approaches that gets us to an age-inclusive workforce. And that's going to become one of the challenges we face going forward. I'm not sure if I answered the question there, but
No, it does because what you're getting at, right, ultimately is like we like there was a pivot when the pandemic hit. You've got a whole cohort, literally millions. I think it ended up being 7 million
yeah,
older workers that were not called back in the age of
correct.
50 and up.
Yeah,
And and then, life and work has technologically advanced so that we could have work from home, flexible work styles, et cetera. Yet to your point, when we started this interview, there's a glaring gap of open roles and needed human talent,
yes,
yet we're still using the old um, system in which to think that's how we'll
yes,
staff. It just, to me,
yes,
it makes no sense.
yes. And that's one of the challenges going forward. I think it played into culture. It plays into um, notions of economic insecurity in this country.
Yeah.
It filled into our voting choices. This notion that I'm angry because the opportunities that I felt I would still have at my age is gone.
Hmm.
Cost of living is going up. I'm figuring out how do I survive, right, with less. If I'm hired, I will likely be hired at a salary lower than what I made before. And so when we have fluctuations and inconsistencies in the workforce, it, it travels into other aspects of our lives. And
Yeah.
it all revolves around our experiences in the workforce.
You've been gracious with your time. I just wanted to touch on one little thing if I can
Oh,
ask you,
sure.
and that is the the really important concept of one sense of purpose and meaning. And when you extrapolate the data on people whom have sense of purpose and meaning, and those that don't. Those that do often have that great combination of they know who they are in life, they know who they are at work. There's an integration
Yes.
between the
Yes.
two, and then they feel that sense of fulfillment, but also it abdicates any sense of loneliness. And we know
Yes.
that when one is lonely, then other health considerations start to deteriorate. So, disease or mental incapacities, et cetera, et cetera.
Yes.
So I guess where I'm going with this, Gary, is do you think maybe, just maybe, that there ought to be a almost fiduciary responsibility of organizations to take a look at the 50, 55 plus crowd to remember that we're kind of all in this together
Yes.
and that for the country, for society, et cetera, we owe it to ourselves to whether it's fractional gig perhaps, but certainly some point of relational capability for the older worker to be part of something so that we can inculcate that sense of purpose, meaning to mitigate issues like loneliness and other health
Yes.
factors.
That's a great point, and I think you are correct. I think companies could do a better job in looking at the employee not as a cost center, but as an individual with purpose and values. But also, this is an interesting point too. When I travel to England, as I do, I talk to my friends who are in their 50s. I talk about their life's purpose, and their purpose is different than my purpose.
Hmm.
Their purpose is hobbies, it's community, it's the pub, it's the football
I was
match,
going to say, yeah, football too.
it's the trips to Portugal and Spain and France.
Mallorca.
Our conversations here aren't about that
Hmm.
because our culture infuses a certain addiction around income, status, and work,
Hmm.
which many of us, myself included, to be honest with you, have fallen to. So we inextricably view ourselves and our self-worth tied to our income and our jobs. We don't have the same leisure time as our friends in other countries. And so work becomes our identity in ways that it doesn't among any of the other major global economies. And so there's a danger to that because when you lose that opportunity to work and you have nothing to fall back on,
Mhm.
a small piece of you becomes compromised. We should be happier as we age, not becoming more sad. We should have a social network as we age, not become more lonely. And that's a product of how we live in this country, our values, our culture.
Well, it sounds like there's some work to do, of which that you are helping, if not leading the charge. Gary A. Officer, President and CEO of Center for Workforce Inclusion. Where can we find out more about you and the good work that you do?
Sure, you can go to www.cwilabs.org. www.cwilabs.org.
Fantastic. Well, make sure that gets in the show notes. One last question, Gary. If you sort of had that silver ball, where do you see ourselves by 2030?
Oh, um, a part of me wants to be hopeful. I think as a country, as a citizenry, we are a resilient people. We are resilient. We do find ways of surviving. We do find ways of making do. So if people are not finding ways into companies as they would like to, you have an entrepreneurial spirit here, which is unlike any I've seen anywhere else on the planet. And people will default to the gig economy, they become contractors, they'll find ways of surviving,
Hmm.
but they shouldn't be forced to do that. It should be an option, not a forced decision. So I think we will overcome this period. I think companies, as the demands for occupation shift, may have no choice, informed by the needs of their hiring managers, to ensure that we get the best available talent in real time into the workforce. I think that's a likelihood that may occur if we are intentional and if we appreciate what different talents can do to ensure positive results.
I love it. Thank you so much, Gary
Thank
Officer.
you.
You are a force for golden and olden good. Thank you again, President and CEO of the Center for Workforce Inclusion. It's an honor, and again, please keep doing what you're doing. We need more Gary officers out there.
Well, thank you, Dan, very much, and thank you for this platform. You do a great job too, so I appreciate you.
Thank you. Thanks all for watching or listening to another episode of Leadership Now with me, Dan Pontefract. Today in the house, of course, Gary A. Officer.